everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Amanda. Today we're going to talk a little bit about aphantasia and is aphantasia caused by trauma. Remember, I'm not an expert, I'm just talking from my lived experience, and this subject is such a fascinating one to me that I talk to a lot of people about their inner experiences also, and just kind of compiled different knowledge about the subject. My username, I am mindblind, actually comes from the fact that I have aphantasia, which is also called mind blindness. So somebody was kind of asking on TikTok whether or not aphantasia was caused by trauma. And the answer, I think, is both yes and no. So originally, aphantasia was first sort of talked about, discovered in the early 1800s, but nobody really did anything about it, and the research didn't progress, and it basically got forgotten about. Then in 2018, a man named Adam Zeman is the one who ended up writing a paper about aphantasia. Basically, he had a patient who had suffered a traumatic brain injury, who had been able to visualize previously, and then after the brain injury, no longer was able to visualize. This was very startling to him, and so he said, hey, I want this ability back. What happened? Why could I visualize before and not visualize after? And when he talked about it to other people, some people were like, wait, what do you mean you could visualize? I've never been able to do that. What are you even talking about? And it kind of like progressed from there. More people were interviewed and it became a research project. And in the beginning, they thought only about 1% of the population had aphantasia, the inability to visualize in your mind at all. But the more research and the more people are being learning about the condition and the more that is known about it, the numbers are now, I think, up to about 4% of the population may have aphantasia. I have total multisensory aphantasia. That means that I don't experience any of the senses in my mind. So again, originally, like in 2018, which wasn't that long ago, they were mostly just talking about visualizing. But as people started talking about their inner experiences, then it started to be recognized that some people experience only a lack of vision. Some people experience like a lack of vision and another sense as well. And there's people like me who don't experience any of the senses in our mind. So what I mean by that is like when taking the just really cliche, visualize yourself walking down a beach. Some people will visualize the beach scene in such immersive detail that they are walking along the beach, they are listening to the sound of the waves, they are feeling the grains of sand on their toes and between their toes and on their feet. They are smelling the salty, fishy air, and it can be very immersive, and they're using all of their senses to create this scene in their head. People like me with total aphantasia have thoughts. I can say those words that I just described to you, but there's no visual or sensory information happening in my head other than the thoughts that are being said. I cannot feel those grains of sand. I cannot hear the crashing ocean, all of that. So back to the trauma question. The research shows that aphantasia can be caused by trauma, like a traumatic brain event, but also it is supposed that many people like myself are probably just born with aphantasia. Now, to be abundantly clear, I always thought that I didn't have any trauma in my life because I had a really pretty nice, easy childhood. But I am also, as of last year, I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD. And just going 42 years as an undiagnosed neurodivergent, person, someone with, you can hear my dog snoring probably, going 42 years as an undiagnosed autistic ADHD person actually does cause complex trauma. being raised in a society that is built for a neurotypical brain causes long-term CPTSD. So I do have trauma that I'm processing due to that, but it's not the same type of trauma as like a traumatic event. Some people think that the traumatic event, whether or not you saw something that your brain is trying to protect you from, or experienced or heard about something, that could be one way that you would lose your internal senses and have aphantasia. Now, whether or not you can gain your ability to visualize back or not, I'm not sure. I think people who have had traumatic brain injuries and had aphantasia eventually do regain the ability to visualize. But people like me who've always had it, there's no therapies or anything like that that anyone has discovered that would suddenly make it where I can visualize. And the reason why I think that I've never been able to visualize is because growing up, I always thought people were talking in metaphors. And this is a very common experience for people who are late finding out about aphantasia. I learned when I was 38 years old, I think, that I had aphantasia, and that was a word for it. Up until that point, I had no idea that other people were able to visualize in their mind. Whenever people talked about counting sheep, for instance, I thought they were just talking in metaphors. Like, I can think of the idea of laying in bed and counting to try to fall asleep. Like, okay, I get it. You're trying to make your brain exhausted and bored, and so you will fall asleep. I never understood where the sheep part came in, except for the fact that it sounded more colorful and fanciful than just say, oh, count until you fall asleep. I didn't realize that what was happening for people who could visualize, they were actually seeing and visualizing sheep in their mind that they were like counting in their brain. That made a lot more sense to me. But this is the case for a lot of people with aphantasia. We just thought that people are using fanciful language. So it didn't go unnoticed when people were saying things that I couldn't do. There are people with aphantasia who figured it out because either being more of a literal thinker, which is surprising because my autism, I am a literal thinker. I just somehow at an early age, I just made it out that people were talking in metaphors, and that satisfied my curiosity. But some people would drill down and be like, why sheep? Why are you counting sheep? And then people would be like, well, because you can see the sheep. And they're like, but I can't see the sheep. I never questioned it. To me, it was just like, okay, counting sheep, 1, 2, 3, 4, but not actually seeing sheep. And same thing like in meditation, when they are using the, think of your place that is your most cozy place to relax. Well, sometimes I think about my bed, but it's not like I'm visualizing my bed. I would just kind of think about my bed. Like, oh yeah, I like being in my bed. And my way to explain it was I thought that like during meditation, for instance, you're trying to like spend time thinking, like stop thinking about these thoughts that might be negative or controlling or stressing you out. Think about these soft, wonderful, fluffy thoughts instead. And I wasn't realizing that for a lot of people for meditation, it was that like immersive experience, again, like on the beach where like all the different stuff. And speaking of like the immersive experience, visualization is a spectrum. So I am at the way end with 0, like it is 100% like just blackness in my mind. I don't see anything. When I close my eyes, I might see like blacks and grays. There's no even differentiation of shapes in my brain. It's just solid nothingness. But on the very, very opposite end of that spectrum is people who can have these like fully immersive experiences where they are having like a 3D movie that they can interact and be part of the visualizations that they're creating. And it's different than hallucinations, because hallucinations you don't have control over. Visualizations, you are in control of what you are picturing. And then there's the whole spectrum where some people see a very clear picture, but it's just two-dimensional. And some people kind of see a sort of outline, they get an idea, but they don't really see any super details. Then some people just barely see any kind of shape at all. They're like, those are the people who I think question about aphantasia the most. They're like, well, I kind of sort of see something, but not really, but like it's not really helpful. So whether or not those people call themselves aphantasia, I think it's just up to them and what language they want to use. If you're not visualizing enough to make an effective difference in your life, then, maybe you have aphantasia. But for me, it was no question. When I learned about aphantasia, I was like, oh, wow, I cannot believe that people can say anything in their mind. Yeah, I obviously have aphantasia. And then, of course, all the other senses too, like not being able to hear sounds and stuff like that. And again, that's not as common. Some people just have the visuals, but they can still hear music and smell things. And it's different senses might be missing for different people with aphantasia. Around the same time I learned about aphantasia is also when I learned about my memory disorder, SDAM, which stands for severely deficient autobiographical memory. And there's a pretty high comorbidity rate of people who have SDAM will also have aphantasia, and that's why I learned about it. And see, unlike aphantasia, where I didn't really question because I just assumed people were speaking in metaphors, like my brain made up like what was happening and it wasn't anything to be concerned about. With SDAM, I knew something was wrong with my memory. People would talk about their memory in a way that didn't make sense to my experience. And when I first heard people describing their memory who had SDAM, it was for the first time where I was like, oh my gosh, your memory is like my memory. We understand each other. We get it. We are the same. Like it felt so validating. But so I always, ever since I was a young child, knew something. My memory was not typical. But again, with aphantasia, it was, when I first heard about aphantasia and I heard that other people could visualize, it was like, are you kidding me? Like, that sounds like a superpower. It is incredible. It still is. Like, my sister is a hypervisualizer, and when we talk, it's just amazing. I'm like, how do you do that? And she used to like get lost in her daydreams because they were so interactive and immersive. But for me, it's just thoughts. Just thoughts, no sound, no words. When I'm reading text, there's no sound quality to what I'm reading. It's just thoughts. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching the video, and until the next one, bye. Hey Milo, were you listening to me record a video today? Hanging out with me in the office?